This is a really long section on protostomes, and we're looking at the phylum Arthropoda, or arthropods, and poda means foot and arthros means joint, so literally translated, jointed feet or jointed appendages. And so you want to look at if you're learning outcomes, look at the key features of arthropods, and then list 4 extant classes of arthropods and the characteristics that distinguish them from one another. So we're looking at subgroups here. And then describe the advantages and drawbacks of an exoskeleton. So we're looking at the protostome clade, the ecdysozoa, and right here is your arthropoda. And this is going to be a rather large section, so we'll try to get through it as quickly as we can. Now, the author of your textbook uses a rank of class for this, but I'm going to be referring to them as subphyla, to be more consistent with the list I gave you for the laboratory. The name is still the same. We're just going to elevate it to a rank above class, but still below phylum. And so for the arthropoda, their characteristics, when we look at them, first of all, they're one of the most successful animal groups, and if we measure by the number of species that we know to exist, well over 1 million species, 1.2 million species. About 2/3 of all named species are arthropods. Arthropods do affect all aspects of human life, from being ectoparasites on them to helping to pollinate crops and so on. So these are the extant classes of the arthropoda. Again, I'm going to use the rank of subphylum, subphyla, plural. And so this would be not the class Chelicerata, but subphylum Chelicerata, Crustacea, Hexapoda, which means 6 feet, and Myriapoda, myriad, means many. Those are the centipedes and the millipedes. So again, we're going to use the word class here. This is a nice quick summary of their major characteristics. You'll see a table like this in your lab manual here. You want to go through this as a matter of quickly reviewing some of the basic major characteristics for the groups. And then these are the common names like spiders and scorpions for the Chelicerata, lobsters and crabs and shrimp for Crustacea. Hexapoda is actually more than just insects. There's a group within there called insect, and Hexapoda, there's another group that has 6 legs as well, closely related to them. And then the myriapods there. So go ahead and make sure you look at that after you've gone through this material as a matter of a quick summary for it. So here's a breakdown in a pie chart of all of the different arthropod groups. You can see, let's say we had 1.2 million different arthropoda. Well, look at that big chunk there, that brown slice of the pie there are the beetles. 33% of them are beetles. That's one order. So you go to the classes insecta order, the beetles are the most diverse of a group called the insects. So the insects start right here and go all the way to this yellow slice right here. Those are all insects. So the insects are the most abundant of the arthropods. And you have your crustaceans like Mr. Krabs. Even plankton is probably a crustacean. The arachnids, the spiders, myriapods, and other arthropods over here. Now, looking at the arthropod success, part of it has to do with the evolution of their body plan and their exoskeleton and the segmentation that occurs. So segmentation, again, as we review, has evolved more than once in the animal kingdom. Segmentation didn't come from one ancestor. So different lines of animal evolution, and you get segmentation, like the earthworms have segmentation. So here, when we look at the exoskeleton, we have segmentation, and some of the segments are specialized in what they call tagma or tagmata, like in this example, the grasshopper here. So segments get fused in together to form a head, which is a tagma, and then the thorax, and then the abdomen. So this would be the head on that insect, and the thorax right here, where all the walking legs originate from. And then the abdomen is that area back here at the back there of the abdomen. Sometimes these tagma are fused further. So in some groups, you might get the head and the thorax fused together, and that forms a cephalothorax. Cephala means head. And sometimes we refer to that as prosoma. Remember, I've mentioned this before a lot of times in my biology courses. The root word soma means body, and prosoma means in front of the body or before the body. Pro can have different meanings there, so prosoma. And so that's the segmentation. Then you have the exoskeleton, and it's made of chitin, which is a complex protein carbohydrate. Or complex carbohydrate, and they have protein in there as well that helps make up these sort of shield-like structures they have on the outside of their body. The exoskeleton does things like protect against water loss. If they get a bunch of nicks in the exoskeleton, they're going to start having water evaporation from there. Another thing that it does is it provides protection, not just against water loss, but against protects their vital organs. And the exoskeleton also provides, which is not on the list here, so just make note of that, it provides a point for muscle attachment. So attachment of muscles, like within the legs and so on. Now, the exoskeleton must be shed, so they go through ecdysis, their ecdysozoans, in order to grow. And then they have jointed appendages, and they come in pairs, these appendages. So every segment if we look at an ancestral arthropod, it just had many segments. So I'm not drawing an earthworm here, but let's say this is an ancestor of all arthropods. The primitive form would have one pair of appendages coming out from every segment. That would be the ancestral form. Okay, so if you have 6 walking legs or 3 pairs, then that would suggest that 3 segments fused in the evolution of insects, for example. Some of these segments may become things like antennae. So let's say this is the head end, and the pair of segments, the first pair of segments there would be, of appendages on that first segment would be antenna. Okay, so again, the appendages could be antennae, plural for antenna, mouth parts, wings, legs, or walking legs are appendages. Some of these appendages can be extended outward or retracted, depending on what arthropod you're talking about. So here's looks like some kind of a bee. They're in an insect order called Hymenoptera, and you can see some of the features we've been talking about. Overall, they're surrounded by exoskeleton. Here, in this case, insects have a pair of wings. That's characteristic. There's your thorax, head. They have eyes and a pair of antennae up here. Here we have 6 walking legs, or 3 pairs of walking legs, and then in the abdomen you're going to have organs of the digestive system, reproductive system, and some other organs that are in there. I'm going to make note that they do have to get oxygen in and get rid of CO2, and they do so through little openings on the abdomen called spiracles that enter in some cases an air sac, but then a finer tube network, which we'll talk about in a little bit. The insects have an open circulatory system. They are coelomates, so they have a true body cavity, but that coelom, some of it is going to be part of what's called the hemocoel. The hemocoel is the cavity, part of that body cavity in which the hemolymph, which is what we call their blood, gets circulated around the body. So this is something we talked about already in the earlier chapter. So they do have an open circulatory system. They have a nervous system, and the nervous system consists of a ventral. They're going to have this double chain of a nerve cord moving along their ventral side. The ventral side is the belly side here, and you can see it here in this bottom image here. Here's the brain, and then you can see one of the cords. The other one's just behind on the other side of it here, because there's 2 of them moving along here, along the ventral belly side. And then every so often you're going to have these ventral ganglia, which I defined in an earlier section. A ganglion is a dense collection of neurons. Not just the neurons, but the cell bodies of the neurons. As a neuron, as was mentioned earlier, they have a real long extension called an axon, and many axons would make a nerve, but they have the cell body that has its extensions as well. And so ganglion is a bunch of these, and then from there these axons extend out from there. And then bundles of axons make nerves overall. So it turns out that these ventral ganglia, which if we were to look at this, so you're going to see that moving along the ventral, you're going to have these two nerve cords, and then they connect at these ganglia. And then another ganglion, and then another ganglion. If you think about it, the brain is just a larger ganglion. But at each ganglion, those ventral ganglia actually control certain activities, certain behaviors of the animal, like controlling eating. So it's like little subbrains within there, moving, walking their legs, even mating, and so on. And these functions can continue even if you remove the brain. So the programming for certain basic behaviors are within those ganglia. So this is the same image we've been seeing here. Now they do have special sensory structures, and in this case, many arthropods are going to have these compound eyes that we see here in this model, looking at dragonflies. Dragonflies capture other insects on the wing like mosquitoes, so they have to have really good vision, and so they do have what's called a compound eye. Again, we see this in very many arthropods. The compound eye is going to be made of subunits called ommatidia, and an individual would be ommatidium, so it would end in dium instead. So you see that here in the term there. So here's one of the eyes. We take it out, and each one of those eyes is going to have its own neuron that picks up signaling from special light-sensitive cells within an ommatidium. And then, as I was mentioning earlier, those nerve cells all are going to have an axon. So all of the axons are coming out of those ommatidia, and they combine to make a bundle of those axons that is called a nerve. So coming from there, the nerve then goes to the brain, so the brain can interpret what they're seeing. Now, if we removed an ommatidium here, you can see that it has like a lens-like structure there, and then it has these cells that are in the back here that are sensitive to light, so they respond to light. Chemical reactions occur within those cells. And then these little fibers here, the nerve fiber is another name for axon, so that would be the axon right there. The nerve fibers exit from there and then combine to make a bundle called a nerve. Other insects are going to have simple eyes, which are not compound. And another name for a simple eye is an ocellus. Ocelli plural. Okay, so you're going to see these terms both here, you see it in the lecture, you see these in the lab. A grasshopper, for example, has compound eyes and has ocelli as well. So these don't form as good a vision as their compound eyes do, and so these are more sensitive to light and darkness. And then the respiratory system, which I mentioned a little bit earlier, a lot of marine arthropods, say like a lobster, crab, or freshwater ones like a crayfish, they're going to have gills to exchange respiratory gases, so they can get rid of CO2 and then bring in oxygen. The arthropods that are, some arthropods that are so small they didn't even have structures to gas exchange. They just gas exchanges through their body overall. For terrestrial arthropods, those that live up on land, they're going to have tracheae. This is plural. Trachea would be singular. And in fact, that's the name of what our windpipe is called. So it's the same kind of name there. And then the trachea branches into smaller network of tubes called tracheoles, which just means tiny trachea. And then so the air is just transported through this branching to just different parts of the body so that they can deliver oxygen and get back carbon dioxide. They don't have a lung or anything like that overall. And then on the side of their abdomen, just on the outside, they're going to have those openings, which I mentioned were called spiracles. So there would be, let's say this would be the wall of the body wall, and this is inside the abdomen and the rest of the body. And these spiracles can open and close and allow for exchange of gases, respiratory gases there as they go in there. So again, they do have some valves. Some other kinds of arthropods have other special structures for gas exchange. For example, spiders have what we call book lungs. And they're called book lungs because they're structures that extend or produce more surface area. So there's like lobe-like structures that go like this within the abdomen of the spider, tucked away, but there's an opening where this occurs here. And over through these structures is where they exchange oxygen goes in and carbon dioxide goes out. there. And so it looks very much like if you were holding a book with the page facing downward, which gives it their name, book lung. Then for their excretory system, the aquatic arthropods, they can just release their metabolic waste into the water from their gills. So their gills are for excretion as well, and they can release ammonia, which is toxic. It's produced when you metabolize and break down proteins. It's NH3. They can release it directly into the water. There's just so much water around, they don't have to worry about water loss, but terrestrial have to worry about losing too much water. So they need other structures here. So here, in the example here of the grasshopper, they have a structure called Malpighian tubules, and Malpighian is capitalized. It's named after someone here. But let's say this is the body cavity, the hemocele right here, and then you have your hearts up above here, and your blood vessel called the aorta, and the hemolymph is pumped around, and then it leaves the blood vessel here because it's an open circulatory system, and then that hemolymph just circulates all around there and then enters back through little openings in the blood vessel, and then it goes back to the heart and circulates around, kind of like in an aquarium where you keep fish. Well, as that hemolymph is circulating, it's going to move across these Malpighian tubules, which are these little brown structures here. They're very, very fine, and those structures will pick up the particles that are within there, including ammonia, and then take it into the gut, and then the stuff can be excreted outward here. The overall system has the ability to bring back things that are important. You don't want to get rid of everything that's picked up by the Malpighian tubules. And this is similar in some ways to what our kidney does. Our kidney filters out just about anything that's tiny enough to be filtered into from your blood. And then the kidney's job, the microscopic structure, their job is to bring back important things, so we don't get rid of everything like potassium and glucose and other things we need for our bodies. And here the overall process is going to eliminate the nitrogenous waste in a very efficient form called uric acid. Ammonia takes the most amount of water to eliminate, and so fish and crayfish and lobsters just get rid of it directly like that. The ammonia, with a little bit of help in ATP and some enzymes, can be converted to urea, which is how we get rid of our nitrogenous waste. So urea is transported around and then filtered in our kidneys. And then you can take and convert this one step further and make uric acid. And you've probably seen uric acid if a bird ever has pooped on your windshield. The uric acid is that white material on the poop. That's the way it gets rid of its nitrogenous waste. So that uric acid is very good at conserving water because it takes a lot less water to get rid of uric acid. It's more dry and pasty. Urea requires quite a bit of water, and ammonia requires a lot of water to get rid of. We're going to look now at our first major group called, and again, this section goes through all of the different, the arthropods is a big group, so we'll see what we can do to get through this as quickly as possible. Here's the class Chelicerata. I'm going to call it a subphylum to be consistent with the list I gave you of taxa to know. So the subphylum Chelicerata, this includes spiders, ticks, mites, scorpions, daddy longlegs, horseshoe crabs even. They look like crustaceans, but they're not, and sea spiders. And I got this picture here. This one is really cool. I grew up in north of town where there's more sandier soils up there, and these would come out every year, get into the house. I used to call them sun scorpions, but I see that there's actually sun spiders, there's camel spiders. Sometimes you see them on the internet, and oh my God, they're so big, but it's a camera trick because they put them near the camera and makes them look so much bigger. They look like spiders, but they're not. They're in a different group of spiders. They're called sulfugi. The sulfugi, and they don't even have fangs like spiders. They do have very scary mouth parts though, and they actually eat their prey alive because they don't have venom to kill them. And then this is a diagram of a spider anatomy that I borrowed to use for this presentation. Point is here is that the sulfugi, the spiders, which belong to another group called the Arani, like Aranya, and the ticks, the Acari, all belong to this group called Chelicerata. And what's important about this one is that the anterior, means toward the head, the anterior most appendages are for feeding, and they're called chelicerae. So this group gets its name based on that first pair of appendages it has at the very front. So the first pair of appendages in this group evolved for feeding, and they might be pinchers or fangs. And in the case of spiders, they're fangs. In the case of the sulfugate, they're these really formidable looking, hardened, sharp structures for tearing apart their prey. The body's going to be divided into two tagmata. They're not going to have a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. They're going to have a cephalothorax. So that's in this picture up here. There's your cephalothorax spider. Cephalothorax is the head and the thorax come together here. The anterior prosoma, which is the cephalothorax, it's another name for it, is going to have all of the appendages. It's going to have, like for spiders, they're going to have these 4 pairs of walking legs, and they're going to have a pair just in front of those walking legs called pedipalps. And palp means to feel, so these are for sensory. And pedi means foot, so literally translated, these are like foot feelers. And you can see the pedipalps sticking out right here. These are not the fangs. This is a pedipalp. There's a pedipalp right there. And then your first pair of walking legs, second pair, third pair, and fourth pair back there. Now, the front is called the prosoma. The back is the abdomen, but it's also called the opistosoma. And I brought that up in an earlier section with flatforms. I said the Opisthorchus was another genus name instead of Clinorchus, and I had written down on that prior section, Opisto means toward the back, or the rear, or posterior, and then soma means body. This is the back of the body, opistoma. So the translation, literal translation, makes sense there. So we have, where are we at here with classification? Kingdom Animalia, we should know that. Domain, above that, Eukarya. Kingdom Animalia. Phylum is Arthropoda. Subphylum is Chelicerata, and we look at an order where the spiders belong to. They're called the Araneae. That kind of looks familiar, like Arania. 35,000 species described approximately, probably more since this book was published, as they discovered some more there. These are important predators, guys. They, as scary as they look, they help control insect populations and other prey populations. Predator and prey interaction is very important. Many of them are going to capture prey as they produce silk webs from silk glands they have in their abdomen. The silk is going to be forced out of structures called spinnerets, and again, it's found back in their posterior abdomen toward the back. Some spiders, instead of using web to capture prey, they actually hunt their prey very actively, like jumpy spiders and this wolf spider here. They can be quite active as hunters, and when they're active hunters, they're going to have better vision. Spiders do have a lot of eyes. Look at the eyes right there on the front of this wolf spider. They have two really large eyes, and they have about 4 other eyes right below there, and then they have 2 more just behind them right there. Other spiders, like say a widow spider, they're going to have very poor vision. They just spin up a cobweb and then just wait for something to run into it. All spiders are going to have venom glands. So all spiders are venomous. Poison is an improper word to use. They do say sometimes a spider is poisonous if the venom is has potential to cause a lot of harm to humans, like with widow spiders and brown recluse, and some other kinds of spiders that can be quite dangerous, but they're all venomous. Basically, their chelicerae are modified as fangs. The fangs are kind of tucked away under the spider right here, but this is where they're located right here. These are the pedipalps, by the way, the feelers, and this is a male spider, I can tell by the way the pedipalps look. But their chelicerae have little channels that lead from a venom gland that's up within what would be their head region there. And then the venom is placed into their prey when they bite with their fangs. So here's a black widow spider. There's several different species of black widow spiders. This one's the one that has red on its abdomen back here. And then this is a brown recluse. We do have a species of brown recluse called the Texas brown recluse. These guys, the black widows, have a pretty potent neurotoxin, which can cause a lot of pain and even paralysis. The brown recluse has more of a hemolytic toxin, which destroys tissues. So you can expect with a bite and an envenomation with a brown recluse, you might lose a good chunk of tissue from the wound, from the bite wound, due to the venom. And then we have the order to carry, which is the mites and the ticks. And the ticks, they don't have their bodies fused all into one tagma overall. So it's the cephalothorax and the abdomen all combined to one. And so you can see that's that characteristic mite look. Some mites are predators rather than bloodsuckers like ticks. But here you can see they call these things in Spanish garrapatas for a reason, because they'll stick up on vegetation like this and wait for animals to walk by, and they grab onto their legs or feet and then walk to the place where they're least likely to get pulled off by the animal that's got them on there. Again, some of the ticks are these blood-sucking ectoparasites. And their first two appendages, because they're chelicerates, they're the chelicerata, are chelicera. Some can spread diseases like Lyme disease or Rocky Mountain spotted fever, which are bacteria that these ticks can pick up. They drop off one host and then get on another one after they shed again, and they pick up the bacteria from one host, and then when they bite the next host, they can transmit it. And then we move on to what your textbook calls the class, but again, we're going to refer to these as subphyla. So the subphylum Crustacea, like the crusty crab, right? So these mostly are marine. Some are freshwater, like a crayfish. They include crabs, shrimps, lobsters, barnacles, crayfish, copepods. Pillbugs are also called isopods. They belong to an order called Arthropoda. These are going to have 3 tagmata, and the first two the head and the thorax, are going to be fused into a cephalothorax, and so you get your cephalothorax again, kind of like with the spiders. Now these guys, their first pair of, this is a big difference usually. What are the differences between these groups? The first pair for the spider group, the chelicerata, was for feeding. They were either pinchers or fangs. For the crustaceans, their first pair is going to be antenna. And if we go back to their ancestry had a first segment. And evolution took the spiders and scorpions and ticks down one path where that first pair became feeding parts. For the crustaceans, the first pair became antennas. So if in terms of evolutionary relationship, the antenna for crustacea and the fangs for a spider are homologous because they come from the same part, evolutionarily speaking, but they don't do the same thing. They don't play the same role. So that's tying it to back to those phylogenetic terms we've been looking at. So the first two for crustacea are going to be antennas. So they have 2 pairs of antennae. Then you're going to have 3 pairs of appendages that follow that for chewing. And then you're going to have various amounts of walking legs after that. These groups sometimes called the biramia because a lot of their appendages are going to have, doesn't look like they have little claws, biramus, or a 2-branching. So if we look at legs more closely of a crayfish, for example, or a shrimp, they're going to be biramus. You don't see that in insects. You don't see that in spiders. So it almost looks like they have little claws at the end. So they're biramus. Now their gas exchange is going to be through the gills or across the cuticle of their body. This is a marine or a copepod. And so we talk about the subphylum Crustacea. This would be an order called Arthropoda. They're pretty tiny. This is under magnification. And then here, this one is, we're looking at the ventral side of a crayfish. Lobsters look very similar, even shrimp do. Here, from here, this is the head and the thorax region right here, and then the abdomen is to the back there. For this one, you can see the first pair of appendages. 2 pairs are these antennae. They have a small pair and then a larger pair. And then the next parts are for chewing. They're all right in here, pairs, 3 pairs. And then we start with our walking legs. And this one, they're going to have 10 pairs. And the first one is modified for grabbing things. It's kiloped, literally means clawed foot, if you translate it. So the kiloped is the first pair of walking legs. And you can see the other walking legs are biramus. It looks like they have miniature little claws there. And if you count them, first pair, second pair, third, fourth, fifth, all of them are going to be connected to the cephalothorax. You may have some smaller appendages in the abdomen, but they're not going to be considered walking legs. So when we talk about these major appendages for walking, they have 10 of them, and that's why they call these decapoda. Like a decade means 10 years. And so That's them. Now, the crustacea, when they reproduce, for the most part, they're all gonochoric except barnacles. Barnacles are going to be hermaphroditic. Gonochoric, remember we've defined before earlier, it means that they have both separate male and female. They vary in the way they mate, their methods for copulation. They're all going to have, though, and this is what one line of evidence that ties all of the groups of crustaceans together is they all have this very similar larval stage called the nauplius stage. They all look like this pretty much. And so that's evidence of common ancestry. And so looking at the decapod crustaceans I was mentioning earlier, I went and got an anatomy of a shrimp. And it's very similar in structure to crayfish that we were just looking at from the ventral side. So shrimps, lobsters, crabs, crayfish, they're going to have 10 feet. That's what that translates to. In other words, 5 pairs of thoracic appendages, walking legs. Now, it looks like there's more here, but these, starting right here, those are actually mouth parts. Those are pairs of appendages called maxillipeds. And maxilla is associated with the mouth region for feeding. Like the top of where our teeth are, our top teeth, they're connected to a bone called the maxilla. And so you're going to have, behind that, then you have your biramus 5 pairs going back here. Now in the abdomen, they have these other little tiny appendages, but those are not considered walking legs. These might be referred to as swimmerets or some other types of names like in the diagram here. Their exoskeleton is going to be reinforced with calcium carbonate, which is basically what you find in an eggshell. And that makes their exoskeleton even harder. That's where they get their name crustacea. Their cephalothorax is going to be covered with this sort of a shield that's going to be called a carapace. And the lobsters, crayfish, and shrimp like this one are going to have these little swimmerets down here. Those swimmerets. And then they have these little paddle-like structures here on the very end of the tail called uropods. And then the crab, when you look at a crab has a similar body structure except the abdomen is going to be tucked underneath. So when you look at a crab, all you see really is the carapace. And I'm drawing one of my favorites, a blue crab that we have around here. That's the first pair, the chelipeds, the claws. Their eyes, they have some antennae here. And you don't see the abdomen. Where's the abdomen? It's not there, right? Well, that's because it's tucked underneath. So here's a picture of a blue crab looking from underneath. And this is where the mouth is. This is one of the claws. This is the other one. And then the other leg's back here. You can see the abdomen right here, tucked underneath. And this is a male blue crab based on the shape of the abdomen. This was from the other textbook from the 11th edition. I don't know why they switched out the crab. So this one was Callinictes sapidus, which means beautiful blue swimmer, the scientific name. And they replaced it with the stone crab, which is in the genus Cancer, which is kind of like the astrological sign, which astrology is not a science, not to be confused with astronomy. And this one's Callinictes, but it's Cancer. I forgot the specific epithet. But under here, this one is a female. It's carrying an egg mass under there, but there's the abdomen is underneath there too. And there's the chelipeds there. And then we look at the barnacles. Barnacles are another group of crustaceans. They belong to another order called Cirripedia. These are the ones, they're hermaphroditic. So all the other groups are gonochoric. These are hermaphrodites. These guys, they start off as anoplius larvae, and then when they settle in, they go and they attach to a surface with their head, and then they go through metamorphosis, and they just stay there stuck to the surface. Some of them even get stuck to the surface of a whale. And what they do is they just extend out these feathery-like leg structures, their legs that they're going to use to capture and filter out food. So they are sessile as adults, and they're a crustacean. So now we're going to look at a group that insects belong to. This is going to be the subphylum Hexapoda, which means 6 feet, and this is going to include the class Insecta. There's at least one other class in this group that also has the 6 feet type structure, but they lack some of the characteristics you see in insects. So the insects are going to be the largest group, as I mentioned, in terms of number of species that have been identified, making them a very, very successful group. They represent more than half of all named animal species, and it's thought that at any given point in time on this planet, there is 10 to the 9s, which is a billion billions, which is 10 to the 18 individual insects, not species, but individual insects. So if you look at this includes every little bee, every little ant, every little flea overall. So this is a table, a short list of some of the insect orders. The beetles, I'm not going to read through all of it. The beetles belong to an order called Coleoptera. And you're going to have a lab where you're going to look at some of the insect orders. Excuse me. Are a little more closely, and then try to actually identify them based on the features like the dragonflies and the grasshoppers. There are certain features that distinguish one order from another. The fleas down here belong to a group called the Siphonoptera. They've lost their wings. What a characteristic of insects. They're going to have a head, a thorax with 6 walking legs, and then an abdomen, and then the ancestral insect of all insects is supposed to have 2 pairs of walking legs and 1 pair of antennae up on the head region. So here are just a few of them. The Lepidoptera, they're characterized by having scaly wings. If you magnify the wings, you're going to have these colorful scales on there. The Hemiptera includes these sort of leaf bugs here. They're related to Chichadas. They used to be in another order back when I learned this, called Homoptera, and then the Hemiptera were included the chinches, the stink bugs. And then here's Coleoptera. This looks like sort of like a rhinoceros beetle here. And then the Diptera, which literally means 2 wings, because the flies have evolved their hind pair of wings became very, very small and can't be used for flight anymore. So they became vestigial wings, they call them. Vestigial structure, kind of like our appendix. So their first pair of wings is still used for flight, and their smaller pair is behind there, and it looks like they only have 2 pairs of wings. And this is a fly called a robber fly, and they like to capture other insects or small animals and pierce them and kill them and suck their hemolymph and fluids out from there. Then you have the Orthoptera, which are the grasshoppers, and then Isoptera. The Ptera, Ptera means wing, and Orthoptera means what board-like wings. Their wing is very flat and board-like. And then while these termites don't have any wings, when the flying adults that are going to leave the colony and move on to go nest somewhere else, their pair of wings are the same. Iso means same. Their 2 pairs of wings look exactly the same. So looking at the external features of insects, I mentioned they already have a head region. They have a thorax, and basically with 3 segments. Remember, it's a pair of legs per segment, right? So they have 3 pairs of segments here. They're going to have 2 pairs of wings, the basic body plan, but things like fleas have lost their wings. Earwigs don't have their wings anymore. And they're not necessarily appendages, but they're more like outgrowths of the body wall. In terms of the way they develop. They don't develop the same way antennae or walking legs would develop. Then we have your abdomen there. Most insects are going to have compound eyes, just like we saw with the dragonfly. Insects can vary in the kinds of mouth parts they have, and that's also another attribute that makes them quite successful. Here we have, just like with a mosquito or that robber fly, we have piercing mouth part that can be used to pierce plants or other animals. You have a siphon or a straw-like mouth part, like with the case of butterflies for getting nectar. And then you have mouth parts just for licking up things. Like a lot of the houseflies get in the house, they just like to try to lap up things off surfaces. And then, of course, we have chewing mouth parts like we see in grasshoppers, and even some flies, the biting flies. There's a group called biting flies. They have what's called mandibles. For internal organization, they're going to have a complete digestive tract. It's going to have specialized areas in there. They're going to have the mouth. They'll have a crop area here, and then the stomach, and then it converts to an intestine, and then the rectum, and different functions go on all along the way there. The digestion is going to take place there at the midgut, and they have some extensions out here called gastric ceca. Excretion we already mentioned was the Malpighian tubules. And in those insects that fly quite often, like a bee and so on, they're going to have a dilated trachea or air sac, which I pointed on that bumblebee, that sac-like, I think it was colored purple in that image there. And that sac helps to pump air further in, deeper into the body as they're using lots of energy. They require lots of energy, oxygen, to generate ATP to fly overall. Remember those networks of trachea and tracheals, and air enters through the spiracles on the side there. There are some parasitic aquatic forms, like say mosquitoes, their larvae, and in that case, their spiracles may be closed permanently, and they can get air through as diffusion through the skin, or they might have a little siphon that they extend up above the water here, like in the case of these mosquito larvae. You can see them there at the surface. They come to the surface there, and they can get air that way. For sensory receptors, they have chemoreceptors, so they can detect chemical signals. They also have mechanical signals, mechanical would be like sound waves overall, and that could be done with these setae or hair-like structures. So the hair-like structures will have this chemoreceptors on there, or mechanical receptors. Then there's the tympanum, which is a thin membranous, kind of analogous to our eardrum. And in the grasshopper, there's the tympanum. Tympanum is right underneath the wing. It's like this. It looks like a little window, a clear window that's just this thin membrane across there. And it's associated with the tracheal system, so they can pick up sound waves and detect it in a sensory way. And then some do produce chemical signals that can signal other of their species, and in some cases they're used for mating, and they call those pheromones, or mark trails, like for ants when the scouts go out and they look for a food source. The insect will go through, many will go through a metamorphosis. When we talk about life history, is the strategy in which these insects go through their life cycle and reproduce, and all the way through their entire lifespan. Some don't go through any sort of metamorphosis at all. There's actually some very, very fancy names for these overall, like Homo metabolin. Well, holo means complete, hemi means half, sort of, and amelos mean none at all. Like these right here, silverfish, when they hatch, they look exactly like the adult. All they do is just molt and then grow a bigger version of themselves. And then your book says the simple metamorphosis, sometimes that's referred to as incomplete. And this is the hemimetabolin, or basically like a half version of it. So incomplete, be aware it may be called incomplete in other sources. And here, the young look like smaller versions of the adults, except they don't have the wings. So these younger ones here are going to be called nymphs. So they go through several stages of molts and growths. They molt, their exoskeleton soft, they grow. And then on their final molt, they become an adult and actually produce their wings here. And then you have holometabolin, which is a complete metamorphosis, like butterflies. Caterpillar goes through pupa stage, cocoon forms, and then they come out as a butterfly. Same thing with this type of scary-looking insect. The larval stage looks way different than the adult. So that would be a complete metamorphosis. So it depends on what group of insects you're looking at. And then you have the Myriapoda, and I found some video of myriapod centipede. These are carnivores here. And they have a pair of appendages on the anterior part that are modified to be able to inject venom. So they have a venom gland. And their bite can be pretty painful, and in some cases with small children it can be dangerous if you were to get bitten by them. But here they're showing different segmented videos of these very, very quick active predators called centipedes. Now, they only have one pair of appendages or walking legs per segment, and as they molt, they add new segments, so they're constantly growing. Overall, you can see the pair of appendages on that one that's feeding there. And so they're all carnivorous, very, very quick. And one way to recognize is that every segment, their pairs of walking legs almost stick out laterally, out to the sides there. This is different than the millipedes. Milli means 1,000. They don't have 1,000 legs. Centi means 100. They don't have 100 legs, but that's just their nickname. Okay, so again, this is going to be the subphylum. Myriapoda, which means many legs, and then centipedes are going to belong to, let's call that a class to be consistent, not a subclass, Chilopoda, and then Diplopoda. And the way I remember that is that diplo means two, and it looks like they're going to have two segments per leg. This is the millipedes. They look nothing like this centipedes here. And for them, if you look at them from above, you won't be able to see the legs because the legs are ventrally oriented. The legs go straight down from there. And they looks like they have two pairs of legs per segment, but it's not. It's because they had two segments fused together to look like one segment. So they really still have one pair, just like the basic arthropod body plan. It's just as segments fused together, it looks like it's two pairs per segment, but it's not. These millipedes are herbivores or detritivores, and detritus is just dead organic material. And some do have bright colors and can produce chemicals. They don't have fangs or anything, so they don't have any real way to defend themselves, but they will release compounds that can be irritating to potential predators. So there's a centipede on the left, and then on the right is a millipede. There you can see the bright coloration on the millipede saying, leave me alone, overall. They are going to court, separate male and female, and young, again, add segments as they grow.